Welcome to Some Stutter Law, Newfoundland Labrador's first podcast about speaking differently. Some Stutter Law is a production of the Communication Collaborative and is in solidarity with the Newfoundland Labrador Stuttering Association. My name is Greg O'Grady. I am a professional stutterer who specializes in covert stuttering. I introduce myself this way as a professional stutterer who specializes in covert stuttering to remind myself of my many yesteryears and attempts at camouflaging or hiding my stutter out of shame and humiliation. I desperately wanted to be accepted and approved and to gain access to fluent, able-bodied privileges. I'm a person who stutters, and those privileges are not often mine. As host of Some Stutter Law, I proudly declare I stutter. Some Stutter Law is an innovative podcast because it's a sanctuary, a space where myths and stereotypes dissolve and stigmas fade away. Some Stutter Law message is about blocks. Blocks are anything that confines the limited potential of those of us who dare to defy societal norms. Blocks that manifest as more than mere vocal hesitations. Blocks comes in its kaleidoscope of challenges. They're not confined to language or communication. They expand to touch every facet of our lives: cultural, racial, ethical, and health related. Blocks don't discriminate. The ultimate block is about the attitudes of others, those unwarranted judgments and misguided expectations. It's the pressure to reshape ourselves, all to avoid the formidable barriers that stand before us. We've set forth on a mission to dismantle the very foundations of communicated blocks. We're sparking conversations that we hope will echo through time by amplifying understanding and compassion. Please visit our website at Some Stutter Law to listen to past episodes or our YouTube channel to watch our videos. On behalf of Some Stutter Law podcast team, we look forward to unblocking with you. If any of our Some Stutter Law conversations triggers any emotional or psychological upset, please let us know. And if you feel it's necessary, you can contact your nearest mental health crisis line. Now, today, Some Stutter Law warmly welcomes my granddaughter, Kris Conlin. Kris is a 26-year-old proud mom of two amazing little ones, Luke, age 3, and Leah, age 1.
It's Leah.
Leah, age 1. Sorry about this.
That's okay.
She calls Winnipeg home, where she has cultivated a passion for tropical plants, leading to the birth of her own small business, Fantasia Foliage, which is a great name. I love the name.
Thank you.
I love the name. By day, Kris works in the payroll industry, where she tackles numbers and data, a realm she never thought she would venture into her younger years. But Kris has grown, developed her skills, and refuses to let Dyscalculia define her. How is that pronounced?
Dyscalculia.
Dyscalculia. Okay.
I always think about it like dyscalculator.
Dyscalculia. Oh, no, that's a dyscalculator. Okay.
Yeah.
Dyscalculia.
Yeah.
Okay. Kris will be sharing her personal journey with Dyscalculia. She believes that by sharing her experiences will raise awareness about this learning disability and inspire others to overcome its challenges. So, Kris, first of all, can you explain what Dyscalculia is for our listeners?
Yeah. So essentially, it's a branch of dyslexia that affects numbers and data processing in our brains. So it can happen where, like dyslexia with letters, dyscalculia affects um, the math portion of your brain's processing system. So it's a disability on or disorder on that track of mind. And it can be very frustrating as a kid, not knowing what's going on and seeing all your peers around, experiencing getting good grades with little studying or no studying. And there you are sitting there at the kitchen table with your mom and dad trying to practice those questions and just getting frustrated because you can't seem to wrap your head around what your other classmates are wrapping their heads around. And then, while also having some other um, cognitive differences from my peers, I felt excluded and I felt like I was an outcast and I was made fun of for not being able to do math. And in middle school in grade 7, I had an amazing English and math teacher. Her name was Miss Elias. She helped me she helped, I believe, develop a math program for kids that just need a little bit extra help. So while she was teaching her lesson, an educational assistant would grab, I think there was like 4 or 5 of us out of class. And then they bring us to another classroom where they teach us, just to catch us up to speed about what we were learning. And then for about half the class and then the rest of the class, we would go back to our regular class and the teacher would run us over what she had taught. And then the assignment would be there as well. So that way we could always bring it back to our class and our other teacher for her to kind of explain it to us. At that point in time, that seemed like the best approach. And I'm not a professional teacher by any means. I'm sure that there is more depth to that program, but as a student in grade 7, that's what my experience was. So it was great at the time, but it wasn't very, what's the word? I guess it was very disclusive from, you're kind of pointing out which kids are needing extra help and you're kind of painting a target on their back. So
Mhm.
it's kind of a rock and a hard place. So the teachers all mean well, but kids can be really mean. And so having dyscalculia, having this learning disability, it made me mad at myself because I was struggling so hard, not realizing what I, um, what I had or what learning disability I had, because it was really only until I want to say into my adult years. And as mental health information became more relevant with social media and with therapists kind of transitioning over to making reels and making TikToks and stuff like that over the 2020s era. And that kind of source of information kind of came out. It's only within the last few years that I really learned, oh, yes, that makes more sense. My friend also too in middle school, she had it. And she was one of those, she still is. She was one of those friends that was really into psychology, like really early on. She kind of found a passion for it and trying to learn everything. And I don't know, at one point in time, the term dyscalculia was coined, but at that point in time, it was either she had mentioned dyscalculia or she mentioned that it was another name for it at that point in time. But that she had trouble with it. And I think it was branded as dyslexia too. I think at one point
Mhm.
in time, it was just numbers and letters that you're reversing. But now it's kind of branched out into these 2 separate realms of dyslexia being with letters and dyscalculia being with math.
Mm. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this calcula is uncommon but widespread because a expert estimate that it affects between 3% to 7% of all of worldwide. I
Yeah.
wasn't aware of that. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
um,
It
so,
is
so
rarer.
yeah, and I understand, Chris, by doing some research that there is no cure for dyscalculia, and that it is a lifelong condition.
Mhm.
And but there is no cure, but early treatment can help help reduce the effects on the later life. So how 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 has this lecture affected your life overall?
Um, Overall, I feel like it has had a big impact on my life. As someone who grew up in a time where mental health information was kind of just shared in amongst professionals and not really shared to the public unless you honestly, unless you paid for it or unless your benefits covered a therapist, you didn't really learn about all these different terms. Up until the birth of social media and until the birth of, platforms such as TikToks, Reels and stuff like that on the internet. Um, it's only been within the last few years that we've been able to kind of figure out what's going on with us. Um, and it's affected my life in a way that it's so frustrating. I wish I would have known sooner what I had and that it's a condition and it's not me. I'm not doing anything wrong. This is the way my brain's wired and I need to figure out what works best for it instead of fighting it. And instead of
Hmm.
beating myself up for it. Because ultimately that's not fair to me and it's not doing anything to help the situation.
Hmm.
So by, practicing like extra practice with my math, being called into those, in grade 7, that academic kind of circle. In grade 9, I had an amazing math teacher. Her name is Miss Cusack. She was awesome. Probably one of my favorite math teachers to this day. She kind of reframed things to me. And I feel like by being in her class, that's what really kind of got me interested in math. By, she just had such a massive impact on my life. Lisa Cusack, amazing. Um, she was able to kind of incorporate humor with her teachings. She was very sarcastic, which I greatly appreciated. She was so funny. And she really helped me structure what a concept was. She's not, she didn't really teach from the textbook. She would read the textbook and go, okay, here's my interpretation of it. And like, she was just so talented in her teaching. She really absorbed all of the information she could and then kind of did like I don't want to say like not theatrical because that's not the right word, but she did like her own little presentation of the information that she sourced and read up on and learned herself. Um, and by her, patience with me, extra grace with me, she gave me a little bit extra time on my tests just because I could get there. I just needed a little bit of extra time to kind of match what the other kids were getting. My brain just needed a little bit to catch up and to kind of work through the problems, work through, what kind of questions she was trying to teach. And yeah, she really, really helped kind of foster this seed of wanting to learn more.
Hmm.
Whereas my experience up till then was very poor. Um, I know teachers did the best they could. It was the 2000s. And everybody was doing their best. Um, so, 20 years later, now that we have all this data and teachers are able to kind of, you know, help more because we have all of this information readily available to us. I think it's just sharing awareness of this condition. And, if any teachers are listening, I think that, if you see somebody struggling like that, um, it potentially could be something like dyscalculia or, you know, anything else. Right.
Hmm.
I think that, you know, by her teaching style and just how animated she was and how funny she was when she was teaching. Like just a very, very amazing teacher.
Mm,
So yeah,
mm. So, Chris, so, this calcula is still relatively unknown, isn't it?
it's not brought up a lot. I feel like in the last 3-ish years, maybe 5-ish years, um, we've become more aware of it. And that's awesome. But we need to talk about it more. We
Hmm.
need to be, we need to be sharing with kids that, you know what, this might not actually be as rare as we think. And potentially maybe there's more kids out there that have it and just don't realize it, and their parents don't realize it because they haven't heard of it. So by sharing my experiences and my thoughts, I'm hoping that, this my experiences can, maybe coincide with somebody else's experiences, and they go, oh, maybe I have that too. And maybe I should talk to my doctor about that, or talk to my teacher or therapist or whoever about it, my mom and dad. Um, now that we have a name for it, we should do some more digging.
Hmm. Yes, yes, there much support for teachers, but we're working, working with students with dyscalculia.
I
I
don't
mean,
think there is.
here it's okay.
No.
So it's quite obvious, and teachers need more support, more guidance. Now, how would they seek this? Is there a specialist that can talk to you about dyscalculia and do you think, yeah. So I'm just wondering about support for teachers who are now trained in this as well.
Yeah,
So it's really, I mean, listening to sharing your earlier, you know, your earlier experience with your teacher. You're also very fortunate, but not all teachers are like that. So I mean,
no.
there's a discomfort level. So what would you suggest? I mean, who can they talk to?
That is a very great question. I feel like therapists who are familiar with the concepts, I feel like, psychologists who are familiar with the concepts would be a great start. Maybe start inviting, social workers and those types of people who are familiar with the concept into the conversation. So that way, on teachers PD days, maybe a social worker can give a presentation on what it is and how we can help our students succeed, and how we can, identify, oh, you know what, maybe that is dyscalculia, and maybe that student's struggling extra hard, and there might be a reason for that. To kind of invite the social worker into the classroom as well to assess the students, kind of cognitive abilities, what they're struggling with, ask them if they need any help. Um, you know, Try not to exclude them, because I can tell you, as a kid of the 2000s, schooling at times was pretty brutal.
Hmm.
So nothing like what generations before me have experienced, but with kids are mean, and I'm just gonna leave it at that. Um,
They they can be, you're
yeah,
right. I based it on, based on my lived experience as a person who stutters. Don't worry.
yeah,
There's a lot of, misunderstanding,
yeah,
bullying, harassment, but it's all based on, they don't know much about stuttering, at all.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah,
Chris, how, for someone that that has trouble with numbers, now you work. I was looking against your little bio. Your work is payroll.
I
Now
do.
that's quite the accomplishment. Then, so how
Thank you.
how did this happen?
Well, interesting story. As I was coming off of mat leave with my firstborn, my son Luke, I previously had worked in the manufacturing industry as a client service representative, um, at a stickers company. And though I loved my job and I loved, everyone around me, when I went on mat leave, it was COVID. As I was coming back to work, that was in November 2020. My son was born December 16th of 2019. So I had a baby, like a 3-month-old, as the pandemic hit. And, kind of just wallowing through that blur of time, you know, coming off of mat leave. I landed I couldn't find daycare. Daycares were shut down. So I was able to land a work from home job. And I interviewed for it. And it was a client service representative position at Payworks. Amazing company.
Hmm.
I worked in their small business department. Learning about payroll. I knew nothing about payroll. And I was really worried because of, having these previous struggles with math, that how am I going to succeed in doing this? And really what their philosophy is, you know, we can teach you payroll, but we can't teach you how to treat people. That is, you know, we can't teach you how to be a good client service representative. We can give you the material, but fundamentally at the core, how are you as a person, right? Do you want to help people, or do you just kind of want to get onto your next call and get through your day? Like, do you want to help the person on the end of that line, or would you rather just, I want to sign off? You know, it's, there's an attitude there that fosters growth within a company, and, having that positive mindset. Um, you know, they, they interviewed me and I heard back within a day, I think, because they really liked me. And it was amazing to hear back from them as a mom that's in the middle of a pandemic with basically a newborn, it felt like. And, just not knowing what the future looked like. So in November of 2020, they hired me November 16th. And since then I've gone through a couple of year ends, where I was on the kind of queue of support staff, other client service representatives. We each, have our own clients assigned to us, but we're also on the phone queue so we can help out other people's clients if they're away or if they just need to talk to somebody right now. So, walking people through their questions, walking people through, hey, I have these differences in my report. Why? Oh, maybe a setting is wrong here. Let's take a look at that. Or, hey, the math isn't working out there. Oh, you need to adjust these year to dates here because you forgot that you left a benefit amount here out. And that's why the T4 isn't balancing. Things like that they've taught me and that I loved and kind of just became absorbed in. And that dyscalculia and kind of, I guess, imposter syndrome that came with dyscalculia, saying, you're not good enough, you're never going to be able to do
Mm.
math, you're going to mess it up. That all went away as soon as I kind of was given this opportunity to work with this amazing company. And they really fostered that inclusivity and just doing right by people, which, you know, is that's their philosophy, is just trying to do right by their staff, doing right by everybody. And it's amazing.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, that's great because I mean, listening to you sharing your history with all the challenges you've had with dyscalculia, and then to be working with the field of payroll. I mean, that is quite something. It is an accomplishment. Now, do you find, Kris, that you're still encountering any challenges at work or at home? I mean, just in day to day experiences
Oh,
with the facility?
absolutely. Absolutely. Those life events don't go away, unfortunately. Um, having to balance the bills, having to, make sure that I'm reviewing my data to make sure that I'm entering things correctly, and analyzing the data to make sure that, oh, okay, this needs to go to, um, this T4 box, or this, um, this setup looks a little bit weird. Why is it being taxed? It shouldn't be, or vice versa. Just making sure that I'm taking the hyper focus drive in my brain, and using that to assess the data and kind of reviewing that maybe 2 or 3 times to ensure that, my brain isn't flipping numbers on me and, run the calculations once or twice, um, to ensure that I'm not making mistakes.
Mhm. That appears to bring in the whole issue of, stress and anxiety. So
Yeah.
do you feel that you actually struggle with anxiety a lot? Is that part of all this?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Um, being able to, um, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. What was your question?
I mean, knowing, knowing that you have to, recheck your numbers, hang up
Oh,
bills.
yeah.
I mean, just the daily activities. I mean, so it's obvious that you go through a lot of anxiety on I sense on a regular basis, because I
Yeah.
mean, dyscalculia is so similar to stuttering as well, because there's very little known still about stuttering.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of anxiety, depression, alienation, feelings of fear and alienation is also associated with stuttering. So there's a strong comparison. But unfortunately, there's a lot of anxiety associated with fear of speaking, the fear of stigma. But I think with you, especially when you have to go through a lot of checking of numbers, rechecking of numbers, that causes additional anxiety. So how do you cope with that?
Yes. My plants.
You
I
what?
come my plants.
Oh, your plants.
So
Okay.
yeah, come home at the end of the day because, sometimes some days can be more stressful than others. And sometimes there's more math to do in one day than in the others. Sometimes it's just questions. Sometimes there's, calculations that you're running through with other people on that other end of the line. So yeah, I think that um it has it is frustrating and it does still affect me to this day, but I would definitely say on a lesser amount as I've, kind of matured into myself and kind of, instilled my own self-worth and kind of built up my self-esteem to the person I am today. That kind of imposter syndrome and the frequency that I make mistakes has gone away a lot because I know what I'm doing and I've studied the material and I know what I'm doing. And if I have questions, I'm not afraid to ask them because everybody at work just wants you to succeed and they want
Mhm.
you to be a team player and to help everybody the best you can and as quickly as you can and as kindly as you can.
Mm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, when you go through these dark periods, much like we all do, especially with
Hmm.
with people who stutter. Do you have a support group or support system that you talk to?
Yeah, I have a therapist that I speak to on a biweekly basis.
Mm.
She's quite lovely. I do have, my family. If I'm feeling, hurt or whatever it may be, if I'm overwhelmed, I can always reach out. Um, I would say I have a pretty good support system, and I'm very lucky.
Hmm. Hmm. Now, you're also very active on Facebook, I see as well.
Yeah.
And but you do a wonderful job with advocating for dyscal dyscalculia,
Hmm.
and you know what is some of the feedback you get from others on Facebook
Oh,
that suffers from dyscalculia?
yeah, I actually had one friend comment on a Facebook post that she didn't realize she had it and that she struggled too, and her experience was much the same. Hers was in the States though, and so their education tiers are a little bit different than ours, I believe. Um, so I feel like with her sharing her experience, it just validated everything I went through, and it made me feel like, oh wow, okay, there is a name for this, but like, am I the only one that has it? Or is there, are there others out there that have it? And when I saw her comment, it really warmed my heart because it was just
Hmm.
that further confirmation that I'm not alone. And
Hmm.
this might actually not be as rare as we say it is. As it becomes more and more, or the awareness of it becomes greater. Um, you know, I I really feel that this isn't that rare at all. And I feel like a lot of people, especially neurodivergent people, um, I feel like a lot of us, being ADHD, and having confirmed autism diagnosis, being on the spectrum, um, it's I feel like a lot of us may actually struggle with this, and it's not all that rare.
Hmm. Do you feel that the government has a role in this as well to provide more support, more awareness,
Absolutely.
more funding for support program, developing specialized programming? Because I'm just listening to you, Chris. There doesn't seem to be sufficient support available for this disorder. So
No,
so so, so what would you recommend? What would you tell the government?
I if I had the opportunity to meet with them, I would say that, more funding needs to be increased for advocacy to get the message out there first and foremost, for education materials. So people who are trained in, you know, psychology or psychotherapy, and social workers and like school counselors, super important. To get them all together and have a few seminars on what
Mhm,
this is and what they can do to help their students who might be suffering silently right now, and that's not fair.
mhm, mhm, definitely. You seem to be you seem to be a very like a lone warrior here. You really are, and I have to applaud you. But it's obvious that you really need more a structured support around you. I'm curious. Have you thought about starting up your own support group or like,
Yeah, I have thought about it. I don't have the time at the moment. Just
which is
with everything.
understandable?
Yeah, with
Yeah.
everything going on with two little kids and having a side small business and working full time, it's a lot.
You got your hands full. So
Yes.
Chris, your business and it's called again. What's it called?
Fantasia foliage.
So where did that name come from?
I was kind of just scrolling through the internet and I saw the name Fantasia and I'm like, oh, that's a really, really fun name or a really, really fun word to say. And then I'm like, well, how can I incorporate that with plants? And that's where foliage came in. So yeah, Fantasia foliage.
So what do you do then? I mean, do you make like arrangements, things like that?
Um, I'm more so focused on houseplants. So if asked, I absolutely will. I haven't had any orders quite like that. But I mostly focus on houseplants, pothos, philodendrons, vines, all,
Oh,
all sorts
yeah.
of things. Monsteras. I do have a couple that are a little bit more rare. They're called variegated, which means that they're not they're striped or they're different colored leaves, and they make beautiful beautiful plants. So I've kind of healed, I want to say, a part of my soul with gardening, and with tending to these plants, seeing them grow, seeing them, if I've rescued it from, the store, and seeing it bounce back where it was one leaf and now it's a full plant. It's very satisfying and it's
Mm,
very, heartwarming to see that you kind of brought this living thing back to life.
mm,
And, I was my Opa, when I was little, he had a huge garden, and then I dedicate all of my love for plants to him. He was just an amazing green thumb. Him and my Omi, they, I was raised by them until about age 5. I mean, not really, but I spent most of my days with them in daycare. My Opa will watch me while my parents went to work. Um, but yeah, I spent a lot of time over there learning about gardening and learning, harvesting in the fall, what that looked like, what the process looks like. Okay, we're going to wash all these vegetables, oh, we're going to, wash all this lettuce and, put it in a salad spinner. And then that kind of went away, unfortunately, after he passed, in 2005. I was 9 at the time. And that kind of just went away. And then as it was honestly just until May of this year, when my friend and I, we were thrift shopping, my friend Brianna and I, we were thrift shopping, and we found these cherry tomatoes that I guess somebody had donated to the thrift store. And we purchased them, brought them home, and we kind of kept each other updated on how they were growing. Here's pictures of mine. Oh, well, mine's got this. Oh, mine's got this now. So we kind of just, that's kind of the birth of how everything happened. And then I kind of just acquired more plants somehow. And they're just in my house. And
excellent.
I was just able to keep them happy, and seeing them grow new leaves and, blossoming. It was really, really, really rewarding. And being able to, my son Luke, he's 3.5. He loves doing whatever mom's doing. So, if I'm, repotting a pot its roots are stuck to the pot, and I'm having to go with my elbow to get the roots out, he thinks that's the funniest thing in the world. He loves helping out with gardening. So,
that's lovely. That's lovely.
Yeah. We spend a lot of time together, just, learning about different plants. And I'm hoping that by sharing what I learned from my Opa, that he kind of has that same experience with gardening and has a love for it, but lifelong love for it.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So, Kris, what advice would you give all others who suffer from dyscalculia, like in terms of self-care? Because I think because of all the mental, the mental health concerns, the challenges associated. What advice would you give the others for self-care, just trying to deal with this situation? Because it's obvious you found yours through your plans, which is wonderful. It's a passion, but like a lot of the people who have various challenges don't often know how to self-care. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I've been there. I also didn't know how to self-care. It wasn't until I started seeing, I believe, a therapist when I was in my teens. And she said, well, what kind of things did you like doing as a kid? And I was like, well, I really liked playing outside up until, I was in my early teens. I really loved, playing with the kids at the park and climbing the trees, and drawing and making pictures, stuff like that. And so my therapist was like, wait. So you like nature and you like to draw. Let's take those and let's see what happens. So over the summer, I think it was when I was 16, turning 17, that summer, I started drawing, and I showed my parents the drawings, and my mom was like, wow, that looks like amazing. And she actually went the next day, and, it made me really happy, and it really just made my heart full, because she and my stepdad, Rob, came back with pencils and with her sketchbook. And it was like, I was using a line journal at the time just to draw animations or whatever it was. Cartoons, Pikachu, was just to name one that I worked on a lot. You know, I really, really enjoyed that. So, up until I had kids, a lot of it was drawing and a lot of it was, playing video games and stuff like that. And just having time to myself. But what I really think, you know, is important is to think back on what made you happy as a kid. What kind of activities did you do? Did you go outside with your bare feet and did you, touch the earth with your feet and feel grounded as a kid? Or, did you stay inside and did you want to color and draw? Or there's a combination of both. Did you want to draw outside? What makes your heart happy? And I think finding that's kind of the starting piece of, finding what makes you happy is going back to and thinking when you were a kid, what kind of things did you do that made you happy?
Mm. Wonderful, wonderful, Kris. Kris, do you consider dyscalculia a disability? What are your thoughts? Or is it
I,
on the because
I,
yeah. Oh no. Well, the reason why I'm asking is that stuttering, like the actual board is 50-50 vote. Some people who stutter feel it's not a disability, others feel it is a disability. I'm just wondering what's based on your lived experience.
it's, it's hard to define it as one or the other because it can range, in severity. Sometimes it's just minor mixing up numbers. Sometimes it's like total, okay, I need to go take a walk because this is too much for me right now. And come back and try and reassess the problem.
Hmm.
Because sometimes we just get so overwhelmed with numbers and they kind of just all scramble on the page. Um, so taking that time to breathe and to step away, you need to, and come back and reassess the problem. Um, I don't know. It's hard to say. I can't really say one way or the other. Because on one part of me feels that, for the system to accept this condition that yes, it does need to be a disorder, and for us to get help. And I don't know how much I agree with that. I don't think that's very fair. On the other side, I feel like it's, the word disorder and the word, all those clinical words can really be labels and very harmful on one's psyche and one's mind. And for that reason, I would say it is just a different wiring system. It is a
Hmm.
different way that your brain works and other people's in the world works too. And it's just that your brains are wired differently. And that's all it kind of boils down to in my mind. Not to discredit it by any means, but it's the way my brain is wired.
Hmm.
It struggles with with this data, and it has had to come up with um, different ways to do the same thing that a million people do the same way.
Hmm.
Um, when you're in class and teachers are giving you different ways to solve problems. I remember, kind of coming up on the cusp of, grade 6 where there was a whole bunch of different ways to do maths. And that was hard on my brain because I had learned how to do math one way for so many years. And then, at the thinking and the processes that, to my knowledge anyway, I'm by no means an expert on this. My understanding is that, the new age of math is to make it faster for your brain to process problems. So I don't know of any of those topics, but I know that it was different than what I was taught kind of, grade 1, grade 2, 1 plus 2 is 3. Um, so yeah. And I guess that was also their way of kind of getting us ready for algebra as well, because
Hmm.
algebra was And yeah, man, I did grow a love for it once I understood it, but getting to that point was very frustrating.
Mm. So you're in high school, how did you deal with this with your teachers? I mean, because you're right. Because when I was going to school, I mean, one of my worst subjects was math. Had to go to school on the weekends just trying to get just trying to get my head around math and geometry as well. I used to hate it. But anyhow, but I had to go for extra sessions. So was that similar to your experience in
I
high
feel
school?
like, yeah, I definitely needed tutoring, and they offer tutoring at lunch hours. So I would give up some of my lunch hours just to sit down with my teacher or with a student peer and, work out the problems I was struggling with. Um, and it was kind of, I tried to take calculus in grade 10, and I wasn't ready for that. My brain was not quite there yet. It wasn't until about grade 12 where my brain was kind of wrapping around the concept of that. And I didn't pursue it because I just really didn't have an interest in it. I just took consumer math, the ones that teach you about mortgages and the ones that teach you about, how to be a consumer, I guess is
Mm,
that course. But yeah, like teaching us how to build a budget, teaching us how to, um, what's better, rent or mortgage? Let's look at the differences. That was really crucial. Um, in, I did very, very well in those classes. I think I finished with a 96. So I loved consumer math. It was easy for me. Um, so yeah, I just kind of bounced around and found a love for math throughout the way.
excellent. Now, if like if you have an opportunity to meet with the the premier of Manitoba best politicians, what would you say if you had an opportunity to meet with them? What would you lobby
Um,
for?
I would lobby for more supports for teachers for sure. Lobby for more support for um, therapists to give them more funding to be able to share their information on dyscalculia with teachers and with the public, and make this more aware so that people aren't feeling alone and feeling like they're doing something wrong when they completely are not. It's simply just the way your brain is wired, and it's okay to have this struggle, but we need to have those support systems in place. And
Mm,
whether that's, it is getting more funding, it's raising awareness, it's, um, building curriculums that are neurodivergent friendly. It's, you know, how can we teach kids that you don't have to be a doctor or a lawyer to be successful? There's trades, there's starting your own business, there's finding what you're passionate about and doing something with that. Like, I was very lucky to be able to have found something that I love as a hobby so early on in life, because now I have all this time to build something with it. And not saying that, you should always monetize your hobbies, because that's not what I'm saying. I think that hobbies should sometimes just remain hobbies just for the sake of it. So you don't always have to be productive.
it's
Um, but yeah, I think that if I were to say something to them, it's more funding, more advocacy. Um, we need to be getting this out there, and we need to be making people aware that dyscalculia is like dyslexia, and we need to be giving it the same treatment level as that.
mm. Now, where are you now on the spectrum of acceptance of dyslexia? I mean, like from one, you're still struggling, 10, where would you be
I think
in
I'd
terms
be
of
probably like 8 or 9, just kind of fully
excellent?
accepting it and trying not to. I'm not fully there yet. I'm almost there. But there's some days where it's like, why can't I just get this? And it's like, oh, I didn't sleep well, or oh, I'm hungry, or I need to go for a walk because my brain is just foggy and I need to just go for a walk. Um, you know, it's, oh, I need a coffee.
Yes.
Okay, you know, but it's, yeah, that's kind of what my experience has been with it.
Nice, nice to hear, Chris. Now, before we close, is there any last words you want to share, like a message to our listeners?
If I could say anything, it would be that, if you feel that you're suffering from dyscalculia, I would say to be reaching out to, do your research up on it. Because there's many lovely, lovely TikToks from therapists around the world that are sharing this information. And, if you do see a therapist or um, see somebody specialized like that, bring it to their attention and walk it through with them, because you may be able to, help yourself and kind of forgive yourself for all of that pressure you put on yourself that really wasn't justified at all.
Hmm. Definitely, definitely. Well, Chris, thank you very much for your time this morning, today, and you are definitely a trailblazer for advocacy. So
Thank you.
anyhow, thanks, thanks again, and we'll we'll be in touch.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you
hey,
so
take
much,
care.
Pepper Greg.